Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and in today's first impressions video we are looking at a 1/48 scale mighty Spitfire from Airfix, and it's red and it says fire on it. What's not to like? So this is the 2020 release of a kit that came out in 2019, and the only real difference is they've done different decals to make it a civilian scheme. So it first came out in its military guise in 2019. So a very recent kit indeed. We have the usual information on the box edge. Tells you that the decals are cartographed there, which is always good, age 8+. The two edges are the same, so you get the box art again. And then on this side, as we flip it over, it gives you a little bit of history. So on this edge, we have a little bit of a potted history that tells you that the Spitfire was ideally suited for racing aircraft post-war. You've got the two schemes here, one which is Duxford 1988 and one is Canada 1949. Then we've got the paint shout-outs. As always, it's a skill level 2 and would have come with 2 flying hours, but I've already used them. Okay, so we have an A4 colour instruction manual, the standard approach of Airfix recent years, which is stapled. Then we have a little bit more of the history there, more than was on the box side. You get the kit part number, gives you the dimensions of the kit, the wingspan, the fuselage length. So it's 206mm long, 209mm wide, 2 decal schemes included, and 2 build options. Then you have the best results information at the bottom as always, and the contact address, so you can write to Airfix and tell them how much you love their kits, or there was a wing missing or whatever. Then we have some assembly instructions. It'll tell you to study the instructions carefully and that sort of stuff, and their usual key. And then on page 3 we get stuck into actually building the kit. So the newer style instructions with the little red parts, which I like. I think it's a nice way of doing. I do think that Airfix instructions are amongst the clearest and easiest to use. So we're starting by building up what I imagine will be the inside of the cockpit eventually, clearly separate to the fuselage halves, which is nice. So we've got some controls and dials going in. We're building up the seat from, well, multiple parts actually, so there's some detail going on there that is nice. Of course, it's 1/48, so we expect that. We've got a nice quilted look to the seat by the looks of it. Then we're mounting it onto its frame. Then we've got the dials going on. It's an unusual shaped decal. It's not the full, so that'll be interesting to have a look at how that works. But it looks like it covers the dials only and not some of the other equipment. Then we've got an option here, whether you want the pilot or not. So I guess if you're putting the pedals in, don't put the pilot in, because the pilot doesn't fit if the pedals are there, is what that's basically saying. Then all these little bits that we've assembled are going into this half of what will be the cockpit tub, I'm guessing. As we flip over, and we're at step 11 already. We are completing the build-up of the cockpit tub, putting the seat in. There's a bulkhead going in there, which has the details on there which are correct. Then there's some framework going in the background. Pilot has posable arms, which is nice. Then we have an option again. So if you're having the cockpit in the closed position, you've got a little section of fuselage to slice off, which is interesting. Basically the inner lip, I think. And then if you're doing scheme A, which is the red one, you're trimming the tail as well. That's interesting as well. There's quite a bit of modification needed here because, well, it's basically showing you on the other fuselage half that you need to trim that off if you're doing closed, and the tail. But also, if you want the door open, you need to cut that and sand it so that it can be glued in the open position. So some nice options here, but not for the beginner with all this sort of cutting and stuff. We're building up the inside of the landing gear area of the wings, and they're separate parts, so that's nice. And then we have this section that goes in across the nose. So we put the two fuselage halves together, and then we've got this that goes in, which is across the fuel tanks. Now, in an earlier kit, that was notorious for being a country mile out in terms of fit. So I'm assuming that they corrected that and got that right this time. But only building it, we'll see. Okay, we're carrying on with the build-up of the lower wing, step 19. So you've got more internal bulkheads going in. We've got the landing light there, and then we're mounting the fuselage on. Upper wings go on. The termination point of the lower wing is along the natural panel line of the wing there. That looks very much to me to be pretty much the point where you trim the wings if you were doing the squared off wing version. Yeah, sorry, I hadn't noticed. Yeah, if you're doing option B, it wants you to cut the wings off at that point. So yeah, and there's some other detail. The cannon positions to be removed and cut out. So that's for the Canadian version. Then we are building up the tail. So the tail planes is made up of two different parts. You've got the geometry there. Then you've got the flaps going in. It seems to be one single part there, the flaps. And then the tail can go in. And you've got, looks like there's two different options there. One with a split in it and one that's solid. So we're now at step 28, and we've got the completion of the wings, and then we're putting in the air scoops radiator. And you've got options for open and closed, as you would expect, and two separate radiator grills. Then we're repeating that process there, and then we've got clear panels, and there's a little note there. Use filler to fill the circular recess in the clear parts. Right, okay, so that is probably because the military version had the camera mounted in there, and so you don't need that, so just fill it. So the civilian version obviously didn't need the camera, so they would have covered it up with a panel, is what they're basically saying. So a little bit of filling work to do there. Then you are actually putting the cannons on in this section, which would be for scheme A. The red one, or scheme B, you are blocking them off, and you've got the little bulges there that go over where the exhausts would be. Then we move at step 37 to landing gear up. Obviously there is some wheel visible, but they've got the full wheel by the looks of it, so that's quite nice. And then we've got the landing gear built up, no brake cable or anything on it, which at 1/48 scale they could have done. And then we could have said, well, that looks a bit heavy, you'll have to replace it with wire. But as it is, you'll have to just create it with wire. We've got wheels with separate hubs on one side, and they don't appear to be weighted. So, and then we've got so we're building up that. We've got various little bits and pieces going on to the underside of the aircraft there, and the tail wheel going in place, and then we've got the two exhaust systems going in. Then we build up the propeller and spinner, so the spinner mounting in separately, the propeller going on the top. It's the same propeller for both versions. Then we're at step 50 when the canopy goes on. And then we're at painting, so 50 steps, which is less than half what they did on my 172 Mosquito. Okay, so it's a little bit crumpled, this, from the way it was folded, but yeah, it's readable. So not too many colours, the main one being red. There appears to be a decal there for the little spikes, but if you're painting a different paint system to that and therefore won't match the decal, you're probably best masking it. It wouldn't be too difficult to mask that, to be honest. Then you've got decal positions for the propeller, and this long stripe here is a decal as well. So yeah, I'm trying to. All right, okay. So main body is red. We've got white spinner, yellow propeller tips, black propellers, and the gunmetal will be for the exhaust. So it's suggesting that the landing gear is gloss white. Doesn't actually say what colour the hub should be. Surely that would be aluminium, which is omitted. Whether that's picked up in the instructions and I missed it, possible. And then B has the clipped wing version, simpler in terms of decals on the spinner. It's simpler in terms of decals anyway. So still not so many colours. The main colour being actually silver. So yeah, but with some aluminium on the tail and a blue spinner. So I quite like that. I like both. I prefer the red. That's the one that we'll end up doing. There is not many decals called out there, and there isn't a separate sheet for common decals like there normally is. So let's have a look at the decals next. We've got a long little sheet of decals here, and just as it looked in the instructions, there is not much in the way of decals here. So you've not got loads of stencil markings that you would have had on a military version, for example. They're divided. In fact, the only common one is for the gauges in the cockpit. So the bottom section is for the red version, and you can see here the decals for the spinner, which you could use for making masks. Then you've got the long decals that go down the sides for the stripe, and the G-fire markings that are familiar. If you were at the air show circuit in the late 80s, you would have seen this aircraft knocking about. There's a few more decals for the Canadian version. Decals are very, very nicely done. You're going to have to be very careful that you get that straight, it doesn't curl. That's quite a delicate little decal there. That is challenging to place, that very thin line like that. especially as the carrier film is not much wider than it. So a very nicely done decal. How easy it will be to get that on, I am not so sure, but I do like a challenge. Right, let's see what we've got in the bag. So, single bag, as you can see, containing all the sprues. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 plus bag with the clear parts in. Let's do the clear parts first, as I've got them here. Okay, well they're nice and clear. They're not brilliant in terms of lack of distortion, but I've seen worse. We've got the 2 little clear pieces there that we have to fill. The windshield is very nicely done. And then we've got the lights, and this will be the wing tips, I imagine. Oh yeah, nothing wrong with that. Just a little bit of distortion. Okay, let's do these in frame order, shall we? So, frame A. This has the underside of the wings. We've got the tail flaps, the inside of the cockpit there, tail parts, yeah, and the bits of undercarriage and the spinner. So the spinner looks a lovely shape. You've got 3 connection points. That should be easy to clean up. The air scoop's got a small amount of detail on it. There is some texture I can see in the light on the tail flaps there. Single piece tail, so I guess that works okay. They'd always be at the same level, and it helps you make sure you've got them at the same level, so perhaps a good idea. There's quite a bit of detail on the inside of the cockpit there. You've got the little rivet points and what have you. I'm sure there could be more detail in there, but that looks good what we've got. We've got the 2 tails there. I'm not sure about this one that has the split in it. You're going to have to go in and cut that little triangle of plastic out of the top there, where it's sort of folded out, it's filled with plastic, which is the limitation of the moulding process. But maybe that should have been separate parts. There's a little bit of rivet detail. What you've got is nice. The same on that. There's a small amount of detail on there. So the main star of this sprue is the underside of the wings here. Panel lines, about right, I'm guessing. Lots of rivet detail. All the little openings and panels appear to be there. From what I know, as always, I'm not an expert. I just know what I know. But yeah, that looks suitably detailed. That's quite pretty, that. And then we've got the parts of the landing gear, which again has got some nice detail on it. Nothing much on that side. Okay, frame B. So we've got the 2 fuselage halves. The panel lines look a little heavier on here, but it might just be the light. As always, what I say with Airfix panel lines, sometimes they look a little bit too heavy, but if you're painting by brush, they're about right. And most model companies will maintain that most people paint by brush, not airbrush. How right that is, I don't know. So we've got the dials there, they're a bit soft moulded, they could be crisper. So the dial frames end up looking a bit heavy, but they're not too bad. We've got some nice detail there on the inside the wing bulkheads. We've got raised rivet detail, fastener detail on the bubbles that go over the exhaust. I'm sure they've got a proper name. Radiator covers seem a little bit lacking in detail, in all honesty. Then we've got the propeller with the connection gates on 3 of the propellers, which I'm not a fan of, but it's commonly done, so can't take anything off for that. I don't think we're using these parts in this particular build. Again, they look a little bit simplified detail-wise. We've got the little sections here that build up the cockpit ribs, and they're quite nice. You could choose to drill those out if you wished. And then we've got this fuel tank cover that goes on the top of the nose there, which has got rivet detail and panel lines. But again, the detail, what we've got is okay, but I suspect there should be possibly more. It could be that as these were sort of racing versions, that some of the rivets were filled in or something like that, and to make them go faster. Having said that, this started as the military version, so that wasn't the thought process when they moulded the parts. Frame C deals with the upper wing halves, and we can see here it'd be quite easy just to take a saw to that and trim those off if you're doing the Canadian version. Again, we've got detail on the top, but I suspect there should be more. But what we've got is done nicely, and the cannons there. There is a little line engraved on the inside for cutting those out for the Canadian version. So they obviously had this in mind when they designed the kit that they would do as civilian versions. So they must be planning this. These are the versions we could do from this. Then Sprue D has all your smaller parts, so there's quite a bit of seam on these. Whether they shifted slightly in the mould, I don't know. I mean, we've not seen any sink and we've not seen any flash so far, but this is a bit heavy on the seams, noticeable on the wheels here. And you've got different types of wheels. You've got 1, 2, 3 different patterns of wheels here. So all for different types, I guess. Then we've got those exhausts, which will be a little bit difficult to get in and clean them out because it's a bit seamy, and they're solid, so then there's no recess there. The tail wheel is okay. It's a little soft moulded. So the definition of the crispness of the parts is just not quite there. We've got the blanking bits for the wing there, some of the interior parts, the flight controls. The pilot is very nice. Now the pilot has quite a bit of detail, and it stands out well. And then the seat is quite nice. Radiators are okay, as is the door detail. It's all right. That it is what it is. It could be a bit crisper. The detail could be a bit finer in places, but with a little bit of clean up and a little bit of time spent on painting it, that should look all right. That's actually the kit contents. Let's have a look at some aftermarket. Okay, so I've got seat harnesses from Edward, and they look suitably nice, and you'll be able to fold them around, do what you want. So yeah, they look okay. I quite like the pre-painted seat harnesses. Unlike other pre-painted etch, you don't have to match them to any other colour, so they work alright. And I have some brass in wheels. Now, what we get is this is the 4-spoke wheel version. So whether that's right for civil or not, I don't know. But these are weighted, which is why I went for them, and they'll have nicely detailed information on there. You get a set of paint masks as well for the tail and for this. So the tail wheel definitely needs swapping out because it's a little soft in its detail. So hopefully that'll just add a little something to it for not much in the way of spend. Also chosen to swap out the exhausts. So the advantage of the resin exhaust, as you can see in the picture, is the hollowed out openings. Now these are circular, the ones in the kit are sort of elongated, so whether these are the right ones I am not sure, but I'm likely to use them anyway. I think that looks better than what we've got. No clean up, I can just paint them and put them in, so happy with that. Finally, we've got the photo etch set from Eduard, and it comes with 2 sheets of photo etch, a brass one and a nickel silver one, and a film of transparencies as well, which probably used in the military version rather than the civilian one. So it mainly features on the cockpit areas, so it will add a little bit of detail around the dials there, and you can see that should look a little bit more busy than the decals on a painted surface, I would think. So quite happy with that. That's pretty much all internal stuff. If I then swap this one out, this deals with the landing gear area a little bit, the radiators. There was nothing really wrong with it. Radiators in the kit, and that looks like the insides of the movable flaps for the radiators, and then just some tiny detail parts. So there's not much that Eduard felt needed adding. So what are my first impressions? There is not many kits of this particular mark out there at 148. There's lots and lots and lots of Spitfire kits at 148, and I'm sure there are kits that are better in detail, but I'm not sure how many there is of that particular model, and certainly this is the only one in a civilian paint scheme. So kudos to Airfix for going outside of the norm and filling a gap in the market. In terms of level of detail, it's good enough. They could have gone further if they'd wanted. You know, it is what it is. I don't think it's a bad kit at all. It's got some nice touches in it. There's plenty of options in it. The soft moulding in places lets it down. It appears that there's a lack of surface detail, but that might be correct. I'm no expert. But yeah, I mean, it all looked fairly nice, to be honest. The pilot particularly is a highlight. Posable arms and good crisp detail. The construction process is good, building up the internal tub there and then fitting that in. The build process was logical. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with this. Now, I'm quite tempted to build this on a display stand and have the landing gear up, as you see it here. I think that'll look quite nice. I think the decals, good as they are, might be a little bit challenging, particularly on the Canadian version, where you've got a thin black line going right around the fuselage where it meets the spinner there. So I don't know. I think that's going to be a bit tricky. But yeah, all in all, that's not a bad kit. It doesn't have a lot of competition. But if you're wanting to build a detailed 148 Spitfire, this probably isn't the kit for you. if you're wanting to build something that looks very, very cool and you just want it to look right and look great on your shelf, then there's nothing wrong with this at all. So there you have it. I hope that was helpful in some way. If you're considering buying this, I think it's a pretty kit. There shouldn't be any issues with fit, given that it's only a couple of years old. So yeah, fill your boots if this is what takes your fancy. Okay, thank you for looking in. Take care everyone, and I will see you soon.